everyone. The Committee on Early Learning, Juvenile Justice, Public Education, and First Generation Initiatives now calls this roundtable discussion to order. Today is Friday, December 4th, and the time is 3:05. And so what we have today in our agenda is really the roundtable discussion with Guam Department of Education and other stakeholders relative to the safety concerns of our students in general and those students specifically who are receiving special education services. Notices for this roundtable discussion were disseminated via email to all centers and all main media broadcasting outlets on November 25th, 2015 to meet the 5-day notice requirement, and again on December 2, 2015 to meet the 48-hour notice requirement. There are three major questions that this roundtable will address. We all know that as parents and as grandparents, educators, and service providers, interpersonal conflicts can occur at any given time. But when these conflicts are manifested by physical fights between students resulting to physical and emotional injury, then we have to ask what we are doing to prevent these occurrences and what we are doing to resolve the conflicts. When we watch a video that shows an adult physically restraining a student with special needs, we are naturally angered and we are naturally heartbroken. And we ask, how did this happen? What are we going to do about keeping our kids safe in our school system? So the first question that we are going to address today is this. Are the videos and fights that have been reported, hang on. Okay, let me back up. I skipped a page. I first of all need to welcome my colleagues and thank them. To my right, I have Senator Mike Nicholas, and to my left, I have our minority leader, Senator Tony Ada. We have Senator Tommy Morrison, and we have Senator Brent McCready, and we have also Vice Speaker Cruz, BJ Cruz is coming in. I also would like to thank all of you for coming. I know that we have limited space on the table, but I can assure you that for those of you who have signed up to provide testimony and to provide input, that I will give you that opportunity to do so. I also would like to thank our Chief of Police who had come here with our invitation, because they do provide services to our students in our school system. And to our left, we also have Ms. Respicio, who is representing the Judiciary, and we also...
Yes, my name is Melanie Brennan, the Deputy Probation Officer.
Okay. So, and I also would like to, hang on, I'm doing this all wrong, right? I'm just like going all over, but I would like to also welcome our Superintendent of Education. And before we actually start the roundtable, you will introduce yourselves to the public. So why don't we go ahead and start with that, and I welcome all of you and thank you for being here. Starting to my right. Yes.
Buenos dias and Hafide. I'm Sergeant John Bagaforo from the Guam Police, officer in charge for the Juvenile Investigation Section.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joseph Cruz. I'm the Chief of Police for the Guam Police Department.
Good afternoon. My name is Officer Tapal with the Guam Police Department.
Hi, Erica Cruz. Erica Cruz, Deputy Superintendent, Educational Support and Community Learning.
Good afternoon. My name is Doris Bukikos. I'm the Project Director for Programan and Agafli with Department of Education.
Good afternoon. I'm Yolanda Gabriel, Division of Special Education, Guam Department of Education.
Good afternoon, Hafide. John Fernandez, Superintendent of Education.
Buenas, good afternoon. Chris Anderson, Administrator for Student Support Services Division.
Afternoon. My name is Rudy Gaza, Judiciary of Guam, in charge of juvenile probation.
Good afternoon. Melanie Brennan, Deputy Chief Probation Officer.
I'm Jolene Respicio. I'm the Project Manager with Judiciary of Guam.
Good afternoon. I'm Rudy Matrani from the Mayor of Jigo.
Thank you very much, and I welcome you again. So I want to first of all provide a context for this roundtable discussion and the framework for how we will address major questions that have been raised by the community members as a result of the videos of our students that have gone viral in the internet and the fights that have been reported recently by parents. The three major questions are as follows. One, are the videos and fights that have been reported indicative of a systemic problem? Number two, how does DOE keep our students safe and ensure that schools are conducive to learning? And three, what corrective actions are being taken or will be taken to strengthen those procedures or programs that will ensure that our students are learning in a safe environment? So this roundtable discussion will be in the context of those three major questions. And I would like to address the first question, which is, are the videos and the fights that have been reported indicative of a systemic problem within the Department of Education? And Superintendent, you could please provide your remarks.
So I will submit for the record, as we conclude this hearing, a statement on some of the broader issues regarding student safety, and then especially for students who students in our special education programs. And but I want to focus in on what the questions are that you raised. So when you raise the issues of fights and videos that are gone viral, I think I would say that they are not reflective of a systemic issue in the department. They are reflective of incidents that do occur in our schools and outside of our schools, which we were well apprised of last year when we saw a slew of videos that came out around the same time, or, beginning of the year to November, that brought to light through the use of technology and social media what can happen when students are fighting and what we see. And again, both we looked at it both on campus and off campus. I would say that as we look at the data, and I said this last year, that 80%, 90% of our students are not engaging in this type of behavior. It is a minority of our students, but having said that, even if it is a minority of the students who are engaging in this type of behavior, when it happens, it is highly and disproportionately disruptive to the schools. It has a highly disproportionate negative impact on our schools, and not just on the schools, but on the victims, on the families who are affected. So it is important that we address those issues. But I do not want to leave the impression that this is something that all of our students are involved in. We do know that we need to deal with that population that does commit these very serious offenses, and we've worked very hard, not just to sustain and build a structure within the department to address these in terms of our policies, procedures, and practices, but also to work very closely with the Attorney General, the Guam Police Department, and the Judiciary to make sure that we're working together to address especially those most serious offenses.
Before you go on, Superintendent, I do want to address this question as a follow-up to your response. You had noted that you don't think that this is a systemic problem. I do know that the Department of Education collects data regarding the type of student behavior, student offenses that occur on a daily basis, and how often those occur by offense. And I did request for that data to do to see if we can compare the data by year, by school year, and I am wondering if you do have that data so that we can then determine whether. Okay.
No, it's this one. Erica, does she have it?
Okay, so for example, I do know that you have listed here insubordination, physical aggression, the use of tobacco, skipping, dress code. So you do have the problem behavior that is listed, and you collect that every year. And I'm sure that you review that, because we don't just collect data, right? And then just leave it there. We collect data because if there are trends in the manner by which our students are behaving, then we can then capture that data and then take the kind of corrective action that would be needed. For example, if defiance and disrespect continues to increase from year to year, like you had a grand total here of 400 for this school year of 2014-15, but prior to that, 13-14, it may have been 300, and prior to that, 200, then that's showing an upward trend. And so I am just wondering, because you had noted that there isn't you don't think that this is a systemic problem, whether your analysis of the data that you have been collecting actually reflects that. And what are the types of behavior, the top 3 or top 5 of behavior that our student misbehavior that is most frequent, that has the most occurrences.
Let me so if I can back up 1 second to kind of talk a little bit about the structure by which we try to manage the data and utilize the data to improve the safety at our schools. So let me just again reiterate that student safety is a concern for all involved in the Department of Education and for and for all of our stakeholders. I mean, that's whenever there is an incident that happens, it has to be addressed immediately, whether it is systemic or whether it is a random occurrence or one singular occurrence. It has to be addressed immediately and properly and appropriately. And that's really the position. And that position comes less as a superintendent and more as a parent. That if it's my kid, that matters to me whether or not you see a systemic issue. So that is our responsibility is to make sure we address each and every one of those issues. But in order to prepare ourselves to adequately address our entire population, which is just a little bit under 31,000 students this year. In order to address that population, we do have to build the systems in place to ensure that we have, that in all schools, we have procedures in place and the personnel trained to implement those procedures, so that we can provide some assurance that we are doing our best to address these situations. Our core strategy, however, is not to respond to these incidents. The core strategy is to prevent these instances. And for that, I want to just reference this because this may come up during this conversation, and several of the staff who are here on board are experts in that. I would consider more experts in this field than I am, having either run schools with this program in place or been in charge of collecting and managing the data. And that is and as you're familiar, implementing the positive behavioral interventions and supports for our students, PBIS, which is an evidence-based framework that's utilized to promote and incentivize positive behavior in all our schools. Because I think the core strategy is, in order to prevent this, is simply to have our students exhibit positive behaviors, to encourage positive behaviors, and so forth. And as part of that, I think all of you who have children or grandchildren in our schools have heard be safe, be respectful, be responsible, reiterated to our kids, because they are learning these basic behavioral expectations. And we started with the middle schools. I think it was 2000, it was a year after, the second year when I came on, that we expanded it to implement it all elementary schools. And this year is the first year of implementation in our high schools. And as far as it's not simply a mantra, but at the school level, these behavioral expectations are then articulated at, in terms of what that means for that particular school and in what areas of the school that will be exhibited. And so I think I just want to make sure that we're aware that, our strategy is not to figure out how to police and intervene in the schools. We want to prevent these from happening in the first place. And I think to that extent, we can talk about how our partnerships have helped to promote positive behavior and what we're doing to try to sustain it. As part of that framework, again, it's not simply to encourage strategies and reward students for positive behavior. We also then collect data. And that data is collected in order to be able to track the impact of the PBIS framework being implemented, to track the incidents, and remember using technology to be able to track and monitor those instances, and at the school level to assemble teams that then look and participate in reviewing that data to determine what we can do at the school level to reduce the incidences that we're seeing. So what you're seeing here collected is not simply a data collection effort. It's part of a whole system of trying to encourage positive behavior and then address the incidences that come up. You described the table going from, again, all of the incidents. So some are going to be more severe, some are going to be less severe in terms of the behaviors that are exhibited. And so what we did was we presented you, sort of the menu of all of these. If we look at, we have a lot in here, but if we look at the overall data in terms of the incidents that are reported, what we do see is, I'm looking at, is the year over year. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the wrong tab. So if you look at the data that we've collected, again, you did mention the top 3 problem behaviors being insubordination, physical aggression, use of possession of tobacco. But it goes on, and you've seen the entire list. From year to year, if we're looking at just total number of offenses, at this, in school year 13 and 14, the total offenses were 4,031 year to date. School year 14 and 15, it was 4,064. And in school year 15 and 16, 3,846. Less 185 compared to where we were 2 years ago, and less 218 offenses compared to 14 and 15. So what we're seeing is that we can, again, track this data and understand of all the incidences being tracked, that in total, we're seeing that reduction. And then we can proceed to break down this data by grade level, by school, and so forth. So it's a lot of data, and the issue is, what we're trying to describe and what we care about. What I asked, and again, this is something we can discuss, is that from the standpoint of what we call level 3 infractions, which are the most serious infractions, ranging from assault and battery to sexual assault, use of drugs, use of tobacco, alcohol, weapons. What we see, for instance, at the high school level was that year to date in 2013, from August to November, we saw 677 infractions, level 3 infractions. These are the most severe. In school year 2014, year to date, there were 727 infractions, and incidences, and in August to November 2015, we saw 595. In middle school, the same trend, going from 615 in 2 years ago to 583 last year to 405, and in elementary, there seemed to be an upward blip so we can track the data, and I guess the question, we're happy to provide as much further analysis. I think the overall point is that we do have a system for collecting data. We do see improvements overall, but that's not indicative of resolving the situation.
Right. So the question, first of all, let me ask my colleagues if, in reference to the first question that I had asked and the responses, if you have any question that you would like to ask the superintendent, a follow-up question.
Not at this time.
Not at this time. Okay.
But may I address the video issue? The video issue you raised. You asked if it was indicative of a systemic issue.
Yes.
I want to say that technology has even if it's not systemic, technology and social media, for instance, has made it easier when incidents do occur to share that information and so forth. So I did want to say that even though it may not reflect something systemic, it may reflect things that would need to be resolved wherever they exist in our system. But I also want to say it's added a complexity to how we address these situations to date, because sometimes these things go online so fast and it's hard to verify before we start to see reactions. So I want to just articulate real quickly that when we see a video in the department, number one, it's a serious, if it looks serious, it is serious. We just go on our err on the side of caution, and we take that, and I've made myself very accessible on social media, so I get them now from whether it's students or parents or teachers who want to share these things. They share it with me, immediately goes to a deputy and to the administrator of the school. So the first thing is to validate it. Number one, because sometimes we get videos that are 2 years old or from last year, and we say, this is addressed. But if it is a recent or a current issue, that has to be addressed and validated by the school, and immediately an investigation begins to address that situation. With regard to the use of technology, I've encouraged being able to share that type of information for investigational purposes. So when people want to have these videos, we don't encourage it being shared in order to encourage further inappropriate behavior, but we have looked at it as a source of evidence, so that if you if you can provide it as evidence and report it, it's helpful to us. And we've taken those as of last year. And every time we get a fight video, for instance, we give it to the administrators and say, identify every student, address every student, whether they are the combatants, whether they are the ones filming and cheering them on, whether they are in the audience instigating it. We have a lot of tools in our hands to be able to address those situations, even if it's just calling the parents in to apprise them that your son was at the Kmart parking garage, watching this fight. We wanted to, last year, be able to address these issues proactively and aggressively in order to deter them. So that's where the videos help. And even if they're not systemic, it's helpful to have that in our hands for investigational purposes.
Okay. Thank you. So, Superintendent, how does DOE keep our students safe and ensure that the schools are really conducive to learning?
There are three components to this that I think are very important, and we really felt strongly about this, and we articulated it in our recently adopted state strategic plan. Our goal is to continuously improve safety for our students. One of those areas is our school facilities, and we've had that discussion before. And I'm very happy to know that this coming year we'll see some resources, hopefully as we complete these procurements. Hopefully come in to be able to address the issues that around student safety that come to us from parents around the facilities. So that includes $100 million in the RFP that is ongoing, and I will be chairing an evaluation committee that will convene next week to start looking at the bids that have come in, so that we can push forward with those major renovations. And we are in addition to that getting $5 million in DOI money. It's supposed to be $5 million over 5 years to be able to address any immediate health and safety issues that arose out of the Army Corps of Engineers report. So facilities is one point. Number two is addressing the behavioral incidences that happen in our schools. So to that end, I would say, as I described before, our goal is to prevent, and so that is why we have looked at PBIS as a positive tool for encouraging positive behavior and have expanded it to all of our schools. And so we're still in the midst of implementing that in our high schools. And again, that is a system of incentives to ensure that we set behavioral expectations and we move students to fall in line with those expectations accordingly. We have, to that extent that we train our employees on that. We even train our DPW partners, our bus drivers, to ensure that we have this positive behavior framework everywhere that we have a student involved. And so that's so the second issue around behavioral incidents is supporting positive behavior, and then ensuring that we have the systems in place and the partnerships in place to address the inappropriate and unacceptable behaviors that happen. Right now, we're in the midst of that continued discussion about what we do with the most serious offenses. And again, this is I don't know if it's controversial, but it certainly is complex. As I mentioned, we are looking at the tools by which we address unacceptable and inappropriate behavior at the school level. And these are talking about students. We have for instance, when we looked at J.P. Torres as an alternative school, it was the behavioral modification school that I would say that's how we can sort of characterize it, that existed. And so what would happen for some of your more severe behaviors would be referred to that school. But ultimately, as we looked at J.P. Torres, we understood that this wasn't solving the issue because too many students were getting caught up in that system, and too many students were not able to come back to the school and get back on track to move towards graduation. So what we've done is we've converted J.P. Torres into a credit recovery school for struggling students, and that's forced us to work in the middle schools and high schools to address those behavior issues that happen on campus. At the middle schools, we're working what we call the revived opportunity rooms. We're calling them positive learning centers. Those areas of the school are meant to be a timeout for students without removing them from campus and without removing them from the curriculum and instructional expectations. They are to get their work and to continue learning. And we're looking at various tools. Right now, as you look at our budget and at our consolidated grant, looking at ways to provide more individualized, differentiated learning, so that kids who are not in their regular classroom still continue that learning process. So, with middle schools, deal with the students on campus, try to get them back on track within the community, and not have them isolated. The high schools, obviously, that's a bigger concern. As our students get bigger and as they go to larger populations, then anything that happens on campus can be of more significant impact. I would say we're happy to report that we don't have any high schools now that are close to that 3,000 student level. As you know, JFK and GW just 2 years ago were opening around 2,700. This year, or with the opening of Teton High School, and this year again, no school is opened over 1,900 students. So we've taken some of those more crowded, more problematic schools down by about 700, 800 students. Now, when incidents happen on campus there, J.P. Torres is not available as a way to remove kids from the school. So we're working on campus to provide the same kind of opportunity room situation at our high schools. And we're also looking at the disciplinary process. When does expulsion become the solution? What do we do in working with our partners at GPD, DYA, and Judiciary to address those most serious offenses and so forth? That's where we are with that conversation. How do we deal with the most severe offenses and ensure that we are protecting all of our students? So I don't know if anybody else would like to add anything, but we do have a system in place, and we're happy to answer any questions about that.
Vice Speaker has a question.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Mr. Superintendent, and I'll preface my comment by saying, admittedly, I am not an educator, and I have no background in education, right? But I have spoken to many teachers, and I've spoken to many individuals who have been principals at the various high schools throughout the island. And I'm wondering when and if your team and the Board of Education is going to come to the realization that this place that we call Teton High School is grossly inappropriate as a high school. That it was never designed to be a high school. Yes, we did ask that it be used for a temporary high school, a temporary school even for middle school while schools are being repaired, but it was never intended to be a permanent high school. The distance between the corners of the school, with school aids, make it impossible. To walk from one classroom to the next is really difficult, and I'm wondering whether or not the board and yourself will come back to the governor and to the legislature and say, this is an inappropriate facility. We need something else, and we'll have to try to figure out some other way to be able to address it. If we need to build a new high school, I just came from a meeting at GITC, and we're paying literally, I think, $200,000 in rent in that building. we could possibly be using that and all the other governmental rental offices, move all of them into Teason and use whatever we're savings to build a new high school that all of you educators can get together and design and say, this is what a school should look like. This is what a school should be that makes it easy to operate, not take old barracks that had military men and have students in them and have it impossible for school aides and teachers to supervise and to protect the students.
I won't speak on behalf of the board. I'll speak on my own behalf about that. And I think the issue there is you raised an important point. I mean, as far as the education system is concerned, again, we are, especially with the leased buildings and the leased schools in general, we are a tenant here. We don't generate our own revenue as a school system. We rely on appropriations and facilities funding from the legislature and from the governor in order to address all facility issues. And so I think to the extent that we can build new schools from scratch for every school that is inappropriately situated for our students, we should find a way to do that. So part of what we're going to be doing as we go through this next, through the RFP here is not just looking at Simon Sanchez, which arguably was not built as a school. But I mean, as far as some of the legend goes, that it was built more akin to public health in Manilao, that wasn't built as a school. And so the stakeholders are saying, rebuild this school as a school. And that's an incredible opportunity if we get the chance to do that. And it's going to cost a lot of money, but that's definitely a conversation that I'd love to have. Teason itself reminds me of Southern. And I wasn't here when Southern was built, but I mean, in terms of the design and how it was situated, but it has the same, if you look at it from a facility standpoint, the same challenges where you have separate wings that need to be monitored, requiring more staff. So the issue of Teason, I mean, it served as a temporary campus for JFK. I mean, if it was that dangerous for our students at JFK, we shouldn't have put them there at the same time at any rate, because once a facility is dangerous, it's dangerous. But I think the issue of JFK is that they do have some more school support. And that's one of the issues that we do need to address, ensuring that we are adequately staffed at all our schools in order to guarantee the necessary level of supervision. But I mean, if we could design our schools, so we see Ukuru High School, we see some of the newer schools, the Atacao League One, all these high schools that are designed differently from our campuses that were built 10, 20, 30 years ago. If we had the opportunity to build from scratch, maybe we would have the opportunity then to redesign some of our facilities, which certainly look different around this island, just based on the different eras in which they were built.
I think my question was, at some point, we've been using Teason now for 7 years. At some point, is the board, or are you going to have a discussion with the board and come back and say, we may have used it, it may have been good for JFK for 2 years, but to think that we're going to use this for the next 30 years for school, let's just admit that it's not appropriate. Let's try to figure out a way. But you've got to say something at some point, that as educators, that it's impossible to monitor and to supervise a campus that's like that.
I mean, I would say it's not ideal, as some other facilities are not ideal, and we do have ways to mitigate that. Now, again, staffing levels could mitigate that by ensuring that all the different wings have the necessary supervision. It might be more than we're providing to other schools, but I would say I would not recommend putting more students back into our existing high schools. So I think the way the conversation would go for me is, if there is an opportunity to have another high school and be able to fund another high school and be able to have high schools of reasonable size designed for high schools, we would definitely want to talk about that reality. But I think right now, to revisit an issue that helped mitigate some very overcrowded schools at GW and JFK, I can't say reverse that unless we have a solution, and I don't have that solution at hand, and would love to receive that from anyone at the table who can help. But again, that's what we're dealing with. Is it better to have 2,700 students packed into GW, or to have less populated schools?
As a temporary facility, I agree that Teason is serving a purpose. But if it's a temporary facility, all right, then you bring up another point. what are the personnel issues that you need to address to be able to supervise it? When I spoke to the board the other night, I believe it was one of the parents that made mention of the fact that you've assigned 6 school aides to the school, and my math might not be that good, but even with my DI and my old abacus, the formula that you were using doesn't justify the fact that Teason only has 6 and JFK has 16. I saw that. I mean, unless somebody can redo the math for me and tell me how that 1,550 translates into the 2 amounts.
Sir, just respectfully, the math that needs to be done is to ensure that we have the adequate resources, as we've been discussing over the past few years, to be able to run the school system and provide the necessary staffing across the school system. So we are going to revisit Teason's staffing patterns to the extent that we can staff them up. Right now, it might involve pulling staff from other schools. So I think that's the challenge. The challenge is, for us, number one, I would say we do have to, part of that analysis will be investigating looking at the data as it relates to these offenses at all of the different high schools, because we did have this an incident reported, but there are incidents at other schools, and we need to make sure we're balancing and not pulling from other schools if we don't have to. But we definitely will look at that. I just think that overall, the legislature does staff us. Does provide personnel funding, and as we've discussed. And I would think in a normal situation it would be sufficient. But at the same time, as you've seen, we've been shorted on the TEF, in terms of the TEF collections, which has required us to then shift funding from personnel to cover the basic functions, the operations of the school system, to keep the utilities paid and the contracts paid and so forth. So that's prevented us from fully utilizing the personnel budget to fund all the positions that are necessary. And so that's been the balancing act that is only getting more severe if we don't find that solution.
We can deal with that in a completely separate discussion, but just specific to the school aides, how are we addressing it? I was hoping that after our discussion on Tuesday that there would be something. I saw the article in the paper that talked about, the statistics that I used were correct, but for some reason my math doesn't show that we're correctly addressing the 1,200 students that are at Teason.
I promise you, we will work to address that, and that's so. I think you're right that there needs to be more support at the school level. I just do not want to leave this discussion without saying that, as you see our personnel requests every year, we do indicate a need for school aides, and in this year we even up the amount of school aides to reflect the fact that we need to be able to support additional one-to-one aides through the local budget, which have typically been funded and covered by the federal funds that we get through special education. So we received an incremental increase, but certainly not enough to cover those staffing levels. So that's a challenge. We do indicate and request for those needs, but we understand that the resources aren't always available. So we are trying to balance those resources and address those needs.
In your response earlier, you mentioned we would have to pull people from other schools. I was very, very proud of you in the beginning of this school year when you moved principals around, because I'd always thought that some of them thought that I started here, I have a right to retire here, and nobody's going to move me. And I was very proud of the fact that you realized that there needed to be some change. And I'm just wondering, with some of the school aides, it might be closer to the house, but if Teason needs help, or Southern needs help because it also has the same kind of problem, can we deploy more people to assist to assure security?
Right, and that's what we've done with Teason. They basically are using borrowed positions right now to assist them. The question of whether they will have permanent school aides, that's something that we need to work through the budget. But I'm saying I'm not ignoring that question. That is something that we will look to see if we can address during this current fiscal year. But I just want to make sure that it is a balancing act of trying to make sure that we are adequately staffed. I think if you ask all the administrators, they'll tell you, for what it's worth, that they are short on the support staff side, and we've worked over the past few years to try to shore them up to ensure that they're being able to meet the basic responsibilities and obligations that we require of them. But teasing again, we will definitely look at.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Superintendent. I have just reflecting on some of the calls that I get at the office, and I'm sure many of my colleagues do get similar calls, but, parents or guardians that have concerns if their child is injured, and sometimes it seems they're confused of the processes. And I think not only for the administrators here and those folks listening at home, could you summarize those processes if their concerns, if their their child has been injured, and could you summarize that completely? Where do they go so everyone knows? Unless to the PTOs or to the administrators working with their parents and notices going to their home, maybe they're familiarized with that, but it just seems that those calls, at least from my perspective, it seems there's some kind of misunderstanding of how those processes work.
Yeah, so I'm not sure specifically what you mean. I mean, when there is an issue, an incident at school,
or if the child is injured,
right.
I mean, can you summarize the process that if they go through to report that, and do they have to wait a considerable time frame? I'm sure there's an investigation that has to take place, either to GPD or the folks that be involved to investigate such a incident. But so they know that sometimes, I'm sure maybe they're listening, why does it take long? Obviously, there is processes involved here.
So I understand. So let me frame this, and I'll ask Chris Anderson to weigh in on the exact processes. Because like I said, as a parent, when there was an issue, you go to your school to resolve it, right? So I'm assuming that this is something that's school-related on campus, and the principal is in charge of that campus and ought to be able to work with the parent and guide the parent along the way towards a resolution. So it depends on whatever the issue is at the school level. We usually promote that it be handled at the lowest level, whether it's with the teacher or with the assistant principal or principal at the school level, and then parents know that they have an opportunity to take any decisions and appeal them upward, or they should know. I mean, that's something we can communicate. If you're unsatisfied with the principal's decision on any issue, you have the chance to be able to appeal it to the deputy. That deputy who oversees our principals is Deputy Superintendent Erica Cruz. And then if you're dissatisfied with that process or that decision, you are able to appeal it to me and eventually to the board. So as a parent, we can talk about the parental process, whether it's a formal grievance process or just any type of issue that the parent's seeking reconsideration. So I do get a lot of those visits from parents who have tried to resolve an issue. We like to see it resolved at the school level, and sometimes we will intervene to just encourage a resolution. But if it goes up the chain, we try to work with the parents to come to a solution that works and is appropriate to the situation. The other piece you're mentioning is, as a parent, if my child is injured at school by another student, that's the disciplinary process. And so I'll have Chris talk about what happens at the school level from the discipline side, since he deals with this all the time. And sometimes it gets complicated if you then start to deal with other agencies or other processes, court orders, and other such matters. But Chris, if you could just talk generally about the timeframes and so forth involved.
So specifically talking about the issue of students who are engaged in some kind of combatives at school and someone gets injured, the basic process, and it's actually outlined in our Student Conduct Procedural Manual, which is a standard operating procedure for the department, which is obligatory for all 41 schools to follow. But basically, when students get into a fight on campus, it's a responsibility of the school administrator to adjudicate, to investigate specifically what happened in the incident and hold the students accountable.
In another document that the department uses, the Student Procedural Assistance Manual, there is a section in the document that gives guidance to the schools to document the assault. And so parents have to be notified that a child, their child, has been assaulted or alleged to have been assaulted on campus, and to inform them of their right to file a complaint or a report with the police department. But specifically, there is a requirement for school administrators to quickly adjudicate the issues on campus. That could be immediately on campus, or it may be a day later, depending on how severe the issue was. If it was a riot, or if it was real serious and we had to get the students off campus, we would most likely just remove the students from campus, and then the due process would probably happen shortly thereafter, maybe the following day. But there is a documentation process. If a student is, when the administrator does investigate and adjudicate and find the student guilty of, let's say, if it's fighting or rioting, there are prescribed actions that are supposed to happen for that particular student, which usually results in a suspension. And again, depending on the severity of it, they may want to call a discipline advisory council hearing and request for additional suspension days. But the time it takes for the investigation to take place can be as quick as the time in which it happens, or it may take a day later for the administrator to complete the due process requirements for the student.
You have a follow-up, Senator Munoz?
I have
Yeah.
a last question. Oh, go ahead.
Maybe just a follow-up to Senator Morrison's question based on what has happened recently. The answer that that we got was based on the manual that is submitted. Is that manual, or that those rules and regs given to the administrator meaning principal, and then going to the vice principals?
Yes.
Does each school run that process differently, or do they adhere to that manual? And the reason why I ask this, Madam Chair, as a follow-up, is because just recently, with the incidents that have happened, a process was go through the administrator, and administrators saying, this is not my responsibility, go see so-and-so, which is the vice principal. And it's like, if the parents believe in their head that you go straight to the top because there's something wrong with their child, and the administrator saying, no, this is not in my purview, go see so-and-so, I mean, it just takes for lost time and a lot of frustration.
I don't want to get into the details of the specific incident, except I would like an opportunity to talk to the parent involved, actually, because I did go check on that, and I was told there might be some different information. I just want to make sure, because that is something that we would want to address if that in fact was what happened, or to understand if there was a reason it happened, whether the other situation was also urgent. But I think that's something I would want to close the loop on. To make sure of. I do know that the assistant principal in that situation, there are assistant principals at the high school level who are responsible for discipline, and so they would be the first line. Even being addressed by the principal would say, we work with this assistant principal who handles all of our discipline issues, and thus not only is trained, but what we would expect to handle in similar fashion for all students involved, so that it is done systematically and with some consistency. I would just want to say that because there was a question about whether things are done in the same way at every school. I think you realize some of the challenge, right, with regard to how we set up a system. We set up standard operating procedures, and this is very comprehensive. It talks about both PBIS. It talks about the disciplinary process. We have forms, our office disciplinary referral forms that get really itemize the offenses and give guidance. If you are filling out that form as like a menu of how you are supposed to appropriately apply consequences. So that we put those supports in place, we train the administrators, they have to go and then implement it at that school level. And our expectation is that we've done enough training to provide some consistency. Now we know it's not always perfect, and sometimes we hear that. I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that when parents appeal those, and we may not see everything, but when parents appeal those determinations, that then there is a process for then looking and seeing whether the appropriate consequences were appropriately applied. And I would say that there is a process for doing that, and to the extent that we need to, continue to let people know that there is that process for reconsideration. But we do hear from parents who go through that process to revisit it. The only thing I would want to caution is that, what I want to say is that the reason why this is a complex issue is because the issues that have been brought to my attention, are that we are sometimes overzealous in the application. That's where the appeals come. We're overzealous in the application of these consequences because it wasn't as serious as it really was, and now my student's out of school, and so we've been dealing with the fact that are we overzealous in applying it, or are we adequately protecting students from bad behavior? That's that balancing act that we have to strike. But I would tell you that's what comes to our attention. So it may be that, and in this instance, when there are severe incidents that are involved, that our administrators are, immediately applying the severest consequences, and then when we see appeals is when parents are seeking relief. Please shorten the suspension; it wasn't appropriate. Please shorten the expulsion. So those or shorten the those kinds of penalties. So those are the types of the information that we get.
So, Superintendent, here's the bottom line as far as parents and grandparents are concerned. When something happens to our child, we want to make sure we go to the top, right? And we know that there are procedures in place. We have vice principals who are in charge of discipline. We have the principal. We have vice principals who are in charge of curriculum. So what happens is that when a parent has an incident happening and they see their child injured or something, bullied or whatever that is, they want to go to the top. It's very natural. So it becomes disheartening for a parent to have to be told your heart is beating, you're upset, when you have just seen your child injured, and then you go to an administrator. The administrator say, "Oh, wait, hang on. I'm not in charge of that. Let me pass you on." It's a matter of relationships, and it's a matter of us just remembering, right, that as a parent, we wouldn't want to be passed on. This is not a department store. No, you have to go to the clothing department to have that address. You know what I'm talking about? That we need to put ourselves. Now, that when I'm saying that, I fully understand that in the context of a school, when we are parents, even as parents, it's really tough handling 3 kids, right? Within the household. They fight. We have to break up fights. In a school, we have hundreds, if not thousands of kids that we have to manage somehow. And as I had noted earlier, yeah, there are conflicts that are going to occur. But I believe that the concern that Senator Munir Barnes had asked is that we're impressed with the training. You have a system in place. But at the end of the day, for that parent whose child had been assaulted, they need to be taken care of. And not only that, once that has occurred, what follow-up occurs after that when the kids come back? Do the administrators talk to the victim and say, "How are you doing today? How are you doing?" And talk to those who were the perpetrators or those who had caused the harm to say, "Okay, are we coming together here or to get them together?" Because at the end of the day, we want all of them to get along, right?
Correct.
So, we're talking right now about procedures, we're talking about manuals, we're talking about all of this. To the general public, to the parents, you know what? That's all going over. Because all they want to know right now, Superintendent, is that when they send their kids to school, that they feel safe, that the adults, there's enough adult supervision, that the adults are supervising them and providing the services, are actually also having their welfare in place, that they're treated with dignity, and that they know that we care for them. So that at the end of the day, when we're talking about this major question about how does DOE keep our students safe and ensure that schools are conducive to learning, that really is about, not only the procedures, but how are we doing this in light of the fact that we do know that fights can occur. We do know that some adults may stumble sometimes in the way they treat our students. And when that occurs, what do we have in place? We do know that we have students with special needs. And, we haven't even gotten to that. But how can we ensure that those students with special needs who can't speak, who need help, that those who are assigned to them are actually we can trust them?
So let me, if I can answer those very directly then, because I think, there are obviously many, many layers here, and that's, sometimes we get lost in those layers. And we have many different people at this table with different angles onto this issue. So, back to, being as a parent, what I'd like to be able to clarify here is that everything at the school site is the responsibility of our administrators. And we have a system in place, and we have the training in place for our staff, for our faculty, for our administrators to ensure the safety of our students. And ultimately at the school site, the administrators are in charge of ensuring that gets done. So the issue, whether it happens in every particular incident, the issue here is that parents should be able to expect that if there is an issue around their safety and the fear of safety of their student, that they will get the ear of their administrators. They are here, our middle and high school administrators. They're hearing this directly from you and from me. And so if that has been lost in translation, let me clarify that. That is, parents should feel and should be able to go directly to the administrator for a resolution of their issue. That administrator doesn't need to go through all of the complexities of it. They know what the process is. They know where they're able to get supports. In addition to that, the administrators know they have the support of the deputy who oversees the schools or the deputies of other areas where supports are needed. But as I said, Deputy Superintendent Erica Cruz will get contacted, and also to myself if the situation is that dire and in need of attention. But ultimately, the administrators are given that first line of responsibility and obligation. So that's exactly the process and the point of contact.
Okay, I'm sorry. Senator Morrison, you had another.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the response, Superintendent. I know there's a lot of experts here, and we've seen many successes out there too in response to these violent activity in the school system. However, I'm not sure if this has been explored and where we're reaching out to the student population. I know there's been role models. There's folks that have been brought to school to try to change this whole mindset. But however, I'm just wondering if there's been a reach out to looking at the student population, who more best to know from their peers these types of incidents and these behaviors, and what ideas have they brought to the table that can help these experts with some other ideas to combat these activities.
I think you're absolutely right that the student voices need to be heard on every issue, but on this issue as well. I'll just tell you from anecdotally in my conversations, sometimes it's hard to get where you want to go when you have these conversations. When I talk to students in general, many of them will say, and I think we understand this, that's not us. That's this group, or that's this small group, or this is this few students over here. Yet we know that when those students, if they in fact are offenders, they disrupt the entire school, right? So even if they're saying, oh, it's not really us, most of us don't deal with that, I don't know what's going on here, they will point and say, but the small group does. But that's the small group, that's the problem that we need to deal with, whether it's steering them back in the right direction or not. We have supported our students. I would say that, we can turn to the judiciary with the Safe School Ambassadors. I think that's, we need to look at that program, whether it's providing the impact that we'd like to see. But what I like there is because we've involved students, we've involved leaders at the school. But these aren't simply your academic leaders. You're talking about students of influence, whether it's been in a positive way or not in the past. I've seen students who've come from robust disciplinary histories playing a part in these leadership roles and interacting with other student leaders. Perhaps we need more of that, where we are involving those students who might be on the wrong track, bringing them over into some position to have influence in a positive way. So there are those types of instances where we want to, get the students involved, in that manner. I mean, you will find students who are concerned, and they will work, and we ask them to be vigilant in reporting and letting me know what's going on, and I get that type of interaction, but it really is, I guess, work in progress, something that we should continue to do. I'm trying to think of anything specific with regard to how to improve, because it ranges. It's the same way it ranges in the adult community. Some will say, that person's trouble, get them off campus, right? And we hear that, and of course we have our processes that we have to go through to give due process to the students involved, work with our partner agencies if they're involved and so forth. And so sometimes we have difficult situations where they know the solution is that person should never be back on campus, but at the same time, we, if we're not able to address it in that way, we run into that situation. But there's a lot of input that we could continue to gather. But I do say I do like the being able to involve our students who have influence in the groups who may not be right on on that behavioral track to actually play a part in coming up with solutions. Thank you.
Senator McCready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to just go back a couple of steps. Earlier, you said that 90% of the students were the good students, and maybe 10% were the ones that created the incidents. Is that about? So, what number are we dealing with when we talk about 10%?
So that ratio, really is kind of a rule of thumb type of ratio, because we looked at this came out of the incidents last year, where you say, you have 10,000 students in your population, and you're coming up with like 100 incidences that are serious.
100 incidents.
Well, I'm just talking about this, and we can go and crunch the data for that. Yeah. But I mean, so I'm saying from a rule of thumb, generally speaking, you are seeing either repeat offenders or you're a small population involved in these. The schools know them; they know who these serious offenders are. I mean, and again, it's usually a small group that can be identified.
1 to 10, in that range.
I'm just saying no, 1 to 10. I'm saying a small percentage, like within 10%.
Okay. You said that earlier. You said that your operating procedure when it comes to videos. What about when a student is violated and there is no video, but you see some type of evidence through photographs? Do you use that same procedure of investigation, and are the punishments the same? I know because the video gets all the airtime, so people look at that and discuss. But there's a lot that people don't see that maybe is taken home and taken photos of, and then that comes back. So I'm trying to figure out, is the punishment the same?
So we're kind of dealing. I mean, it's all the same disciplinary framework. So basically, what more or less, all right. I mean, the issue is whether social media involves cyberbullying. That's a specific type of offense. But what I'm saying is that with videos,
is violence, right? I mean, it really doesn't matter.
Right. But what I'm saying right now is that the difference that we're seeing today is more going on through social media. Mm-hmm. Now, that could be videos, it could be snapshots, whatever it is. We need to be aware that we have more sources of information, more public and visible sources of information to deal with. And so I think for the most part, we've been, as we said last year, we're going after this. We become aware of a situation through a video. We investigate it with the very same protocols and as aggressively as we do others. Now, I would say last year when we saw when certain administrators saw an off-campus incident, someone in uniform, the question was, do we have the jurisdiction and authority to even touch them? Because normally we handle things that are on campus, but now you're seeing videos of students in uniform off campus. We reviewed the laws, we reviewed our policies, and it gives us the authority again to address off-campus incidents that undermine the educational mission of our schools. And we use that as the ability to be able to select some of those serious, incidences and address the students under that authority.
So, but you do acknowledge there's a serious problem, a mediocre problem, or
of
not a problem?
A problem
of violence in school.
It's hard to say. When there's violence happening, that's serious. So, like I said, the fact that 10 videos surface may not tell you that there were 100 or 200 or 300 incidents at a school. It just makes it very visible of what happened.
There's a number that you're looking for to to acknowledge that there is a problem, or is there
No,
a score, or is there a ceiling?
I'm a parent. I have 2 kids in my public school system. If it happens to one of my kids, it's a big problem.
So one incident's
right?
a problem, right?
One incident's a problem, but the reality is we need to be able to, within our authority, be able to have all reasonable measures to address that problem. So we have to be able to say, do we have the structures, personnel, and supports in place to address those situations? I think that the issue is just like we do with the police. The police will acknowledge that one incident is a problem. And so when they see a video at the Gagnon McDonald's, I'm sure they say that's a problem. It may not be indicative of a systemic issue, but it sure is indicative of one issue that they need to get to the bottom of. That's how we see the issues at our schools. So that's what I'm saying, is that it is a problem.
2 more questions, and I'll be
Well,
quick.
I guess what I said with the 10% piece was that we know that and that's from a strategic standpoint. We have a strategic approach that we encourage positive behavior from all of our students, and then we see the students who are not, who are not committing those positive behaviors. They're actually in a different tier in different category. These are students who are habitual offenders. That requires a different strategy. So from a strategic standpoint, knowing that you're dealing with a smaller group of students and not the whole body of students is important for developing an appropriate strategy. So frequency of offenses is taken into account when we're disciplining.
So two more questions. One is, we're all here talking about this issue, these problems, maybe 100 people here. And I've heard a lot, I've heard the family, the chairwoman talk about the family. A lot of these problems, and this is a question, start at home. And so we're all here talking about it, but how do we address the problems that reoccur that start at home? We're all trying to put our heads together and do what we can with the minimal of resources that we have.
Right.
And I know you're doing the best job you can. I tell you offline that I support everything you're trying to do without the resources. So what do we do when the problem starts at home? Do we get the parents involved? Do we come up with mandates? And this is, I guess, the ending part of my question. Does the legislature come up with mandates with teeth on it that either punish the offender so the victim can then learn and go to school without being afraid? Or does the Department of Education say, no, the legislature, you guys stay out of it, we can handle it. We can handle it with GPD. You guys would kind of be a roadblocking this.
Right.
What do you need from us, and can we help?
So you have the right people, and maybe there are even more. They're definitely in this room, whether they're administrators, whether they're parents, whether they're from the advocacy community. You have the partners here at the table, and maybe there are some outside this room that need to be engaged. Because you're right. This is something that I have to say, is that we don't teach violence, we don't encourage violence, we don't condone violence, we don't tolerate violence as a department. But because we are a community and we are a small community, if it's happening anywhere in the community, it's happening in our schools. So this is not a school issue, alone, and that's why we need these partnerships. And one of those partners is the legislature. Now, how we can work together to address that issue, whether it's resources or some other types of, supports, we need to sit down and talk about that, because I think that you'll talk to any of our partners here and realize that we're all kind of strapped, but we're all doing our best because we have a responsibility to our community. And I think you're right. It's an issue. Now, you mentioned the parents. Like I said, it's not only the parents, right? I mean, kids learn this stuff off of TV, from movies, from other kids, from social media. They learn it from other people, without just going to home. But again, we're saying whoever's involved outside, we need to be able to address that comprehensively inside the schools, because we're educators and support staff, and the community and beyond us is more diverse and more varied. So, I think we do need your help in any way possible, because our job is not to protect 90% or to address 90% of our kids. We're trying to avoid violence in any situation in our schools. Unfortunately, we're not there. That's what happens. That's what the video surfaces. So, you can go person by person throughout our department and see, to see whether we have the requisite sense of care or intensity of care and aptitude to try to address these situations. But I don't know, and I couldn't testify right here that I know anybody in this room who would look at a situation and say, I saw that video, I'm not concerned. I was concerned. When I got it, I said, take care of this and address this so we understand what's going on. The other thing I wanted to point out with regard to social media and other things, any evidence that comes to our attention, we have to investigate it. Now, you know for sure that social media requires investigation because sometimes it's just not what it appears, whether it's the time frame, whether it's 2 years ago, whether it doesn't include other circumstances and so forth. But we take it and we say, look, we know where it happened, we know who the witnesses are, we should be interviewing all of them and getting as much information so that we can accurately address that situation. So it does require the same level of investigation as any other incident.
So,
Well, I got some questions and comments, and I like to comment on what Senator B.J. Cruz said. I was talking to the superintendent about TGen not designed as a safe school because of the way it's built. And what I'm getting at is when we had that meeting at MU Lujan, I was asking for support because I'm not actually partial, but yes, my obligation is up in Jigo, and I'm addressing the Simon Sanchez building. And I'm saying that, Simon Sanchez was a clinic, not a school. I'm saying that maybe, the legislature here, and I'm glad that we're here addressing this, you should address it as a safety issue because I don't think that the kids should be there. Not to mention the way the structures were lined up, even the library. God forbid that there's a riot up there because it's very, very easy to pick up a guy and throw him over and him landing on the shelves of the library. God forbid that something might happen in the near future, because it ain't worth the millions and millions of dollars that we might not have to build a new school for Simon Sanchez. And I'm pleading with you, senators, to look into this because, we're still on the 3 bits and we still don't know if we're going to build a new school or repair that school that's there. And I think that, the situation with Simon Sanchez, if you do it right, it would work for all of us. There's always an issue about building or repairing schools. Well, Simon Sanchez is different because I kind of said at one time or another that you can build a school there without interfering with the classes, because you can build a school right there in the parking lot and the football field. The football field is no use there. Kids actually don't practice there as far as football is concerned because it's not safe. That school wasn't made for a school. It was made for a clinic. And it was made for people that can't hardly move. The kids need a place to play football, need a place to play baseball and be safe. And I'm pleading with you to please take that into consideration because there's no other way to do that but build a new school. And and we're here talking about these incidences, and I don't want to mention what incident this refers to, but I think that the parents and the grandparents are concerned about the way they treat the perpetrators versus the victims. And it was mentioned in one conversation that kids that were the victims are scared to come in school because the perpetrators are still there. And I know that there's a lot of issues, and I don't want to point any fingers, but we have to correct it. We have to correct it that when a victim wants to go to school, that the perpetrator is not there to scare him or to size him down from his feet to his face and make him think that they're going to kick his butt again if he says anything, because it shouldn't be that way. We're all leaders here, and we sometimes want to make decisions that are very, very unpopular. And I really don't care about election, because I ran as a mayor because I wanted to help my people. And at saying that, I think that we're kind of moving too fast on where we're at, and maybe we should step back maybe a couple of steps, because you know what? I am a father, I am a grandfather, but the most important thing about this right now is I was a student at one time. And let me tell you, I was bullied. I was bullied, and I was bullied because my father told me that if I fought back and I got suspended, he'll probably be the bully again. But let me tell you, I really, really think, and I hate to say this, okay, because I'm part of it. I'm a parent. And I think that we should hold the parents responsible for what their kids do in school. They should hold the parents responsible. When I was growing up, I wasn't held responsible. I mean, my father wasn't held responsible. I was. And I was scared. I was scared not because I was scared, but I was scared because of what my father might do to me. And you know what? I am here and I have no regrets about the way my father was as a father, because he was a loving father and I love him. But we have to face the facts that who's responsible should step up to the plate and help us, because they have children, and if the children is not doing what they're supposed to be doing in school, they should be held responsible. And you know what? I'm not saying that they're bad parents, because let me tell you, a lot of my speeches when I speak to the schools, okay, is I think that if I take care of the kids, the parents won't have to worry about their kids, and they'll do their diligence to do what they need to do so they can bring bread to the table. That's my thought about being the mayor of GDOE and taking care of the schools and the kids, and doing whatever I can with the small, with the little resources that I have to make the kids safe and to make them learn as much as they can, so the parents don't have to worry about their kids. But this is 360, right back to where the parents are at, because I really, really think that maybe, when they work and they try to put food on the table, maybe they should step back and find out where their kids are at, what they're doing, and what they have been doing. Because I think that, if we all come together as a community and do our responsibilities, we won't be here. So, we've tried what we're doing, and I thank all of you that are experts in what the kids need and what we have to do. I respect that. But if turning left is not doing a good thing, then why don't you turn right? And what I'm talking about is, we have to nip this thing in the bud before it happens. And I know, I just want all of you to know that I'm the representative of the Mayor's Council to Department of Education. But, I feel bad because I don't think I'm doing enough. And, but I'm not the expert, but I'm just giving, suggestions in what we think might work here. And please, I'm supportive of the kids, and I'm supportive of the parents, and I just want to work together here so we can come to a solution, and keep our kids safe. Thank you, and God bless all of you.
Thank you, Mayor Mentner, and we certainly agree that we want the best. We want the best facilities for our students, and I think Superintendent, when Vice Speaker was asking you about TGen, really what we're really asking you is that, do you think that TGen really is the best facility that we can provide for our students, which was intended to be short-term?
I wouldn't say, I know you're asking me about TGen specifically, and I don't want to say that without saying, without including all the schools that may not be appropriate for our students at this point in time, given their history. And that's why I included Simon Sanchez and I included Southern High School as facilities that are not conducive to supervision. To the same time, to supervision or long-term, regulatory safety. I don't want to simplify that issue. So, To me, you run a Teton like a college campus. It might be situated in that way. If we're getting our kids ready for college, it could work, but there are modifications that are definitely needed. Is it ideal? No. We would love to build these facilities from scratch and have the input of educators and families and so forth involved, but we're not there. And again, so I say that I would love to get to a position where we would say, compared to this new facility that we can build, Teton's not appropriate. But I don't have this new facility I can build for the students of Teton High School.
But you would want a new facility for our students in the high school.
So with the $100 million that's out there with the facilities planning, we have indicated that our priority would be for all of our secondary schools.
Okay. So
Right.
basically, what you're trying to do, our role here as legislators is actually to appropriate the funds. Your role is to articulate to us what the needs of our students are, right?
Correct.
And so, to the extent that we have started with Tejan as an interim and all of a sudden had become a permanent, I'm just asking whether permanent high school, I am just asking the extent to which we have our students' welfare at, as our primary goal. Do you believe that they deserve a different campus, a new campus?
I believe that our students deserve new campuses. Right. I mean, that includes Teton, and that includes all of our schools. I want to say that because I understand the overall dynamics around Teton High School and the discussion about the issues involved with Teton campus. But as a tenant, I would say right now, we need that campus because of the population of our schools. If there are resources to provide new campuses to our secondary students, for sure, we would use that, and then we would start with Simon Sanchez. We have GW, we have Southern, we have all the schools there that I would say need those types of improvement.
Thank you. Go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Soup. Just a quick question on the data, just to clarify, because I'm just trying to pour through it myself here. On tab number 2, we have all the different infractions, and then we have the counts on the infractions. But I was just curious because I was just thinking about GPD, for example, when they arrest somebody, they can arrest them and charge them with multiple offenses, but it's still one arrest. And so I was just wondering, as you guys track these infractions, are these do you filter out everything else and just call it one thing, or could these be a combination of a single occurrence but multiple infractions?
They can be multiple infractions from a single incident, right?
Okay. And the reason why I wanted to ask was because, just crunching some of the numbers here, for example, we have 3,846 infractions as per this report. But if they were all part of a single, or not all, but if some of them were part of single occurrences, then we may actually have a lower number of incidences necessarily. They could all be multiple infractions under a single incident, for example.
Right. That's correct. And we're struggling with with the results of having better tools. So right now, we can crunch the data many different ways, and I guess that can be a continued conversation with the committee about what exactly and how do you want to see this general data broken down. At least going back to 13-14 with Power School, or and again, being more data centered and data oriented, our job has been to ensure that we have tools to collect the data, to clean the data, and then now we're in the point of how do we report this data best to serve our purposes, but also to serve the purpose of stakeholders. So that's a good conversation to have, and we're happy to respond and let you know what we can do to provide. Either it's more related to the number of individuals involved versus the multiple charges being assessed. But let me ask
please, yeah.
Deputy Anderson to also comment.
Now let me just clarify, Senator St. Nicholas. Each of these incidents are a single incident. What I was trying to say was, you could have a student that was involved in a fight. There were 4 people, and that's a riot. Depending on how the school cites them, they're supposed to cite that as a riot, not as a fight. So it could be either of the two, and so schools may get that wrong. But I'm just saying that the actual numbers that you see here are actual individual incidents.
Okay, because what I was wondering was, for example, let's say a student gets busted for forgery, right? That's one here, and so they start getting they start causing a disruption in the classrooms. That's disruptive behavior, and then they get tagged for that one, and then they push the teacher back because the teacher is getting in their face. So is that also, do you add that also to assault and battery? So do all those get tagged into the same spreadsheet as it's one incident, the forgery or whatever initiated it, but all those different things that happened, are they all affecting the data?
Well, so no.
Or was it just a forgery that goes on?
Our protocols call for the school to identify the most serious incident, and that's what goes into PowerSchool. And then in the incident notes in PowerSchool are the lesser offenses that the student may have committed in that incident.
Okay.
So we try and capture all of the different things that a student may have done, but in terms of what's captured in this data is the most serious offense that was actually...
Wow, so then we have, like, for example, here the level 1, level 2, level 3 offenses, right?
Right.
And so, for example, on physical aggression, that could have been a level 3 offense. And we're only tagging it as, we're only tracking it as the physical aggression because that was the most egregious. But but what might have initiated the aggression might have been a much lesser offense that we're not tracking?
Well, we're tracking it in our incident notes in PowerSchool, but not in terms of the actual number of incidents. The student is charged with the most serious offense.
Okay.
That is true. And then the weighted consequences connected to that.
Okay.
But yeah, if there was something else that may have precipitated that fight that was of lesser offense, it is captured in PowerSchool, but it's not reported in these numbers.
Yeah,
here.
because when I get these informations on these fights, right, and I kind of watch the videos too, and you see all these kids getting together and them fighting. I think back to my days in school. Almost never does that happen randomly where all of a sudden I was walking and then there's 6 of them and 4 of us and we started fighting, you know?
Right.
There was something that kind of built up to that.
Right.
And so the reason I'm asking about the underlying cause and effect relationships between the offenses or the incidences is for the PBIS portion of it, if we wanted to adequately intervene before it got to that level, are we really identifying the root cause of why they were all there and why they were all eventually fighting? You know, what was the actual pebble that started the avalanche, so to speak? And if we can help in any way with helping to track that data or to come up with different ways to interpret it, please let us know. Because you know, when I look at those things and I think back to it, I'm like, you know, I remember back in my day. Somebody I was bullied. Somebody bullied me in the schoolyard because we were in the classroom and, you know, he answered a question wrong and I snickered and he was mad at me for you know, snickering, you know. But then it led to something that today probably would have been on a video. So I just wanted to ask about the incidences and how they interrelate and how effectively the school is able to drill down on the data, and if there's anything we can do to help with that. On our end as well.
So I wanted to ask Chris to just comment really quickly on that. So I just actually, so you know, because you're looking at the data framework, and again, where it's like work in progress, because we now have this the ability to collect and track the data, and so I just wanted to be clear that we, you know, there is first of all, that's why he's here to correct me if I got it wrong. So that's good. But the second issue is that because, you know, we have paper forms and then we have you know, input into our data system and so forth. So there are different levels, but also there are different levels for analysis. One at the district level, and then clearly at the school level. So I don't know if you want to talk about the school level analysis, but they're able to meet regularly to go over the data, and they know the kids and they know the situations better than we might.
The reason why I ask is, you know, and just disclosure, my wife's an assistant administrator, and so we'll have conversations at the dinner table about, like, you know, her having to do fact finding. And I'll ask questions like, so in your fact finding, are you logging down and is the department able to actually drill down on that data that actually led back all the way to the eventual incident report? You know, so I really think that, first of all, I mean, just from experience, I really think that you guys are doing a really good job of training the professionals that are there. You might need more professionals on the ground. You might need more boots on the ground, and that's where we can probably help at the funding level. But on the data side, in order to support the case for funding, I just wanted to know if there's anything we can do to further support that, because there's a lot that goes into what eventually happens and what eventually gets reported. And those nuances might actually be more of the root cause of why we're having these problems in the schools. And if we need to come up with a way to track those nuances and eventually fund the ways to mitigate that, you know, that's probably where we need to have the data matching the appropriation and the solution.
I would welcome, you know, that continued discussion, because I would just say that, and I want to just remind you that we, and again, when we get to the students in special education, all of the same things kind of, apply at the school level. So they apply as well in those cases, plus, the additional things that we can talk about. But I want to just say that we do have, for instance, parent-family outreach here with Doris Bucos, our special education, other parts of the department. So in addition to, gathering and analyzing the data, in addition to looking at the various issues that we need to address in terms of, what's out in there in the community, what's happening at home, the social work involved, the psychologists, involved, and all these. There's so many different factors here that we can, definitely talk more about. Yeah. But that you're right. The reality is, if you're looking at it at the district level, you see fighting. What's happening at the individual level is something that happens in the community at home that, if we're really trying to address, requires a much more robust set of tools. So we're not just disciplining students, but if there's an issue at home, how and who gets involved in trying to address that situation? If we need to provide more mental health support to our students, who and how do we do that? Because we try to work as partners, but we all know that we may not be able to get every child. So that's that is the big challenge.
Okay, we have a number of community members who had signed up to provide input. And so what I would like to do is, before we go to further with addressing the major questions, I want to give the following individuals the opportunities. I'm going to ask for you to make room. I believe we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 who have signed up, and then, but please stay because you may have to address some of their questions that they might have. And so if we can just take a break right now and allow them to please, maybe you just stay. Yes, just stay and let me call Mr. Superintendent, and then you might want to stay. Yeah, okay, just stay. Okay, you can go. Yeah, you can. Those two. Okay, so if we can have Monique Baza, Dan Del Priori, Carol Darlow, Dr. Kirk Bellis, Elena Garcia. Mayor, I believe you already had provided input, and Dan Summerfleck. It's Mr. Dan Summerfleck. Let's share the. And we have Maria Gutierrez. Okay, so I believe I had received a note that we have an individual who would have to leave early. Yes, so I'll start with you. And please state your name and clearly for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for hearing me speak today, Madam Chairman and the panel. My name is Monique Baza, and I am a parent, and I am also a teacher at George Washington High School. I'm here to ask you for your help. Our campus, which is supposed to be a drug-free, alcohol-free, and zero tolerance for violence campus, is anything but this. GW High School is a ticking time bomb of violence, drugs, and alcohol-related incidents that continue to disrupt the mission of GDOE. While I agree with the superintendent that it is a small population of students that are engaging in these acts, how the situations are being dealt with allow for these acts to continue to create an unsafe environment for our students. PBIS works for the students that know how to follow the rules. The ones that have a hard time with it are the ones that are creating the chaos on the campus and making it unsafe. We have our own list of repeat offenders. We do not have many options at our level. I know this because I have sat in on many disciplinary action council hearings, and the only thing that we can do at our level is to recommend additional suspension days, anger management, or drug and alcohol related program enrollment. More often than not, these students come back to our campus. And upon their return, another offense is committed, but the level of the offense escalates to a more serious infraction. I too have been at the aid of staff trying to break up riots. And after the process, the violent student returns. If it is our responsibility at the school level to keep the student population safe, who is looking out for the safety of the faculty and the staff? We are the first responders, and we are there every single day. We too deserve to be in a violent, drug, and alcohol-free environment. JP Torres used to help us with the at-risk students described earlier, but we no longer have this as an outlet, so the students always return. Please, I ask you to help us and come up with a solution to this problem, because we already have experienced the loss of a student due to violence in our schools. This was a very tragic event for our community. The longer we wait to address this problem, the more we place our schools